AI. It, of course, is having an impact in all sorts of areas. In the past, we might have thought of robots, and that's the image we get from the movies, isn't it, of what AI is about. Machines, and usually they're evil machines who are out to destroy humanity or something like that, and humans have to defeat the machines. Of course, more recently, a lot of talk about driverless cars, and of course that raises all sorts of questions, doesn't it, about, would we trust the technology? How advanced would it have to become, and so forth? So that's been in the media a lot. But of course, in all sorts of other ways. When we go online now and we're doing our shopping, when we're getting movies and we get recommendations for new products or movies or whatever, it's AI or machine learning, and I'm going to use those two terms more or less interchangeably for this talk. It's there in the background, and it's doing the processing, and it's giving us these results. Similarly with searches these days, increasingly AI is powering the searches. And of course, once we go onto social media, again, AI and machine learning is driving this. It's driving what we see, the posts that are presented to us, and so on. All of these things driven by AI. And of course, when we go online and we search for certain types of certain information, then we're getting more information fed to us along those lines, and it's machine learning that's doing it. And of course, OpenAI's ChatGPT. This has been, over the last few years, quite a game changer in this move to what's called generative AI, where it's generating new content. And this really took many people by surprise. Many people who'd been skeptical about what AI could do, how advanced it could become in terms of asking it questions about anything. Asking it to write a poem or a song or whatever. And all of a sudden it was doing this in a much more advanced way than anything that there had been before. And so people who thought, well, there's always going to be a big limitation on what AI can achieve, were stepping back a little bit and thinking, oh, maybe I was wrong about this. Maybe this technology is going to be far more advanced than we'd realized. And of course, this is having a huge impact in all sorts of sectors. And we'll come back to some of that a little bit later. Of course, loads of successes. I'll not take time to go into this. Many of these in the context of medical diagnosis, whether that's detecting eye disease or dementia, even weather forecasting, and a notoriously difficult problem, AI being used on that front, and one that I happen to come across that I'm hoping is going to work out this season, but I don't know, that Liverpool are apparently using it for improving their performance at corners. So let's see how the season goes. It's certainly not entirely clear so far, but again, it's being used increasingly in the sports world as well. But of course, there are also concerns, and we've talked about that a little bit already in our questions that we've been looking at. Fake news was brought up in some of the discussion, or deep fakes. Replacement of jobs. So here are 20 professions that could be replaced by AI. And again, across a wide spectrum of possible jobs. Now, of course, the picture is mixed. It's not as if it's just going to wholesale take over everybody's jobs, but certainly a concern raised there. I'm hoping there'll still be a need for people to teach AI and computer science, but let's see. We'll see how that goes. And of course, some of this is more speculative too, about whether it poses a threat to humanity. So, how big is the threat? There are concerns, it seems, jobs being an obvious one, but just how far do these concerns go? And of course, we're aware of issues with surveillance, and we've seen some of these problems with racist robots and so forth as well. So loads of issues that crop up in the media, and quite often you don't have to go too far in some of these discussions to see some connection being brought in with God or salvation or some religious theme. And so fairly recently, just picking up a couple of examples of this, No God in the Machine, the Pitfalls of AI Worship, and Is AI Our Salvation or Undoing, or just more of the same? Okay, so it's at that kind of level, the transformation that is being talked about. Well, how significant is this? And what impact could this have? And quite often it does have these religious overtones. And so that's one of the things that I'd like to explore a little bit. So to give you a sort of sense as to where I'm going with this, having tried to explore this a bit and sort of think about, well, where are the connections with a Christian worldview? What I'm going to suggest is that there are three, I think, fairly fundamental ones that I would like to explore a bit further. So first of all, a question about AI and the mind and consciousness and the difference between a machine and a human being, questions of that sort. And this, I think, raises a really interesting and profound question: who are we? What is a human being? Are we just sophisticated machines ourselves? If AI is able to do something very similar to us, if it's able to achieve this kind of level of intelligence, so it raises this really important question. And this is always an important question for humans and for society, and different viewpoints and philosophies will give different answers, but then I think that should drive us back to a biblical worldview to see, well, what do we actually believe about this? Secondly, up on the top right, AI ethics and society. So these are the issues that are currently being raised, issues about the deep fakes, issues about jobs and so forth. This is not about just future prospects of AI, it's AI as it is here and now and likely to develop over the next 10, 20 years and so forth. So a question about how we should live in the age of AI. So another really fundamental question. And these first two questions, by the way, are, if you like, two of the most profound questions that people have been asking for thousands of years. Who are we and how should we live? I mean, it doesn't really get much more fundamental than that. And thirdly, the future. A lot of speculation about where this technology could go and how far it could develop. And that then, I think, raises a question for us about, well, what are the concerns here? Is this a threat to humanity that we should be concerned about? And what are the longer term consequences for us as human beings? And when you bring in not only AI, but the use of AI and biotechnology, perhaps to change humanity and what's called transhumanism, raises all sorts of questions. What's wrong with the world and what's the solution to it? How do we want to improve things? So these, it seems to me, are the three areas, if you like, where a Christian worldview meets with AI in some shape or form. And so that's what I want to explore for a little while tonight by looking at each of these. Let me just make a distinction, first of all, between two types of AI. What we might call narrow AI and then general AI, or AGI, artificial general intelligence. Now, narrow AI is what we have at the moment, and it's what most people who are working in the field of AI are doing. They're trying to solve problems. It might be some scientific problem, it might be a medical problem, it might be a business problem. They're trying to use AI techniques to solve that problem. And if it solves that problem, if it's being used for medical diagnosis, it's not going to operate your driverless car. You'll need a different solution for that problem. And so for each case, you'll need a different AI program to address that problem, and that's narrow AI. That's what we've got at the moment. The goal for some people, we shouldn't be misled by a lot of the media hype around this. You might get the impression that everybody working in AI is trying to achieve general AI, that they're trying to get AI to a human level of intelligence. Certainly we're not there, but secondly, most people working in the field aren't even trying to get there. Most people are really focusing on particular problems. But there's been a lot of talk, given the advancements with ChatGPT and similar programs, a lot of talk about whether something like Edge AI is possible, and if so, how soon? Could it get to a human level of intelligence? Okay, well, let's think a little bit about how AI works. So here we're thinking about an example of modern machine learning, a very simple one that's often used to illustrate the general idea. And like any computer program, we're going to have input of some sort, we're going to process that information, and we're going to generate output from that. So here we're trying to develop an AI program to distinguish between images of cats and dogs. Okay? So what we'll do here then is take a whole bunch of images, and we feed these into the system, and we also feed in the information, this is an image of a cat, this is an image of a dog, and so we tell it which is which. We give it all that information. Okay, then we do something very sophisticated in the middle here, which we'll come back to, and then what we'll do is we'll give it a new image. The bit in the middle is basically to try to learn what's called a model to distinguish the cat and dog images. Now we feed it a new image, and it's able to tell us that it's in fact a dog. Okay, just checking everybody was awake there. Although it's maybe not completely as clear as some of the others, but anyway, it's a dog. Okay, and the point is, it will do this better than most humans. It'll get a very high level of accuracy, and quite often, even if the image isn't that great, it'll still do a good job. Okay, so it can be very accurate at doing this. Now, what it's done is it's been trained, as the technical term, or it's learned. Machine learning, of course we might ask, is it really learning? But we'll use the term anyway, it's too well established. It's learning from the images that we've fed in. It's constructing this sophisticated model, and it's now able to make these accurate predictions. We could do the same with medical images, right? Different images, some that are images where the person has a condition, other images where they don't, and it can learn to detect the problem cases, okay? Now how it does this model in the middle, it's a very sophisticated statistical model, okay? That's the idea. Now, we could go into a lot of the detail about that, but the long and short of it is, that's what it is. And this brings me, I suppose, to the first limitation of AI, okay? Because all it is a statistical model. And so if we give this field a different name, if we said this is applied statistical modeling, we probably wouldn't even be having this discussion. AI, machine learning, whatever you like, it boils down to a statistical model, a very complex statistical model. In fact, so complex that very often the people who have developed the AI system don't really know exactly how it's managing to distinguish between these images, which in itself causes a bit of a problem, right? Because now we give it a medical image and it gives us the answer, and actually it seems to get it right most of the time, but if we don't know why, that's a problem. And you can see the problem there in a medical context, in a medical but also legal context. If we can't explain how it's arriving at the output, we've got a problem. So I would say that what we've got is just a lot of statistical processing of information going on. And so there's just no reason to think of that as having anything like genuine intelligence. We've just trained a very good statistical model, which is very useful. But we shouldn't mistake it for something more than that. And even when we come on to the very advanced techniques that we have with these LLMs, as they're called, the large language models, ChatGPT and others, essentially they're doing something, okay, it's more extended, if you like, than this, but it's doing something very similar. It's still creating a statistical model. And so when you feed in your prompt, you ask it a question, what it's really trying to do is take a sequence of words and predict what would make sense to come after that. And it's doing it based on all the resources that it has access to on the internet and elsewhere. Okay, so it's still just using all of that data for making predictions and using the vast power of modern computer processors to do that. Okay, here's another limitation of AI. So here's an example that I fed into ChatGPT, a prompt. I bought 5 jumpers for £5. How much would it cost to buy 30 jumpers? Well, you don't need to think about that very long to work out the answer to that it would be £30. And ChatGPT gives quite a detailed answer, and it explains it line by line and comes up with the right solution. Therefore, it would cost £30 to buy 30 jumpers at the same price of £1 per jumper. So far, so straightforward. But now you take another example, and this is one from a website. I'll come back to that in a moment, but now let's just look at this one. I left 5 jumpers out to dry. It took them 5 hours to dry. How long would it take to dry 30 jumpers? Well, it's a bit cautious here, you know. It depends on various factors, the size of the jumpers, the weather conditions, and so forth. Yeah, so it's a bit cautious. But ultimately, the reasoning is the same as in the previous case. So you'll see highlighted there in bold, so based on this rough estimation, it would take approximately 30 hours to dry 30 jumpers under similar conditions. It's 5 jumpers, 5 hours, 1 jumper, 1 hour. Okay, you get the idea. Now, what's going on? Well, as I say, you can find this in a video by a computer scientist with the title, Why AI is Incredibly Smart and Shockingly Stupid. Now, what's going wrong in this example? Well, think about how AI works. It's taking all the resources at its disposal on the internet and whatever other sources it has, and it's now essentially looking for patterns to use those patterns to answer your query, okay, in this sort of statistical way that I was talking about a moment ago. Now, when you think of the first problem, you'll probably find quite a few examples of that out there, you know, online or in the literature elsewhere, in books and so forth, because it's a sort of example we'd give to a child, you know, 5 jumpers, £5, or 7 jumpers, £14, or something like that, and then they've got to work out, well, if it was a different number, what the cost would be. This example, however, you probably won't find so many examples of this kind online. It's not really a useful one to give to a young child learning to do arithmetic. So you don't find so many examples of this. So the patterns aren't there. So it spots the pattern from the first one and it applies it to this one, with no knowledge of the fact that it's a completely different scenario, because this is about common sense reasoning about the world and how the world works. What it knows about large language models, it's all this data, all this input from language. It's just processing language. But here, we're taking a step out into the real world. So many people have highlighted this kind of problem, this limitation in terms of common sense reasoning. Now, This is not to say, of course, people are working and probably the latest version will do a better job than this, but you'll still find the limitations elsewhere. And so one of the things that I would like to highlight is that it really is important when we're thinking about the use of these tools and when we're thinking about education around this, that we know where the limitations are and that is part of our education around AI, what it's good for and what it's not good at as well. Okay. A final point relating to this bit is that going back to the point about the input and the processing and the output, there does seem to me to be a pretty fundamental reason why this can't achieve, if you like, something similar to the human mind. So let me give an example of this. Let's suppose that we got one of the world's leading teams of AI developers, got them together, and we gave them the following problem. We'd like you to develop an AI system that can detect emotion in people's faces and in people's speech and respond as if it had emotion. Challenging problem? There are people working on that kind of problem, and with some success. Okay? But, and with enough time and effort, that's potentially something that they could succeed at. So, you imagine you get angry with the robot, and it gets angry in response. It acts just the way another human would. Okay? But now let's suppose we give them a different problem. Let's suppose we say, but we'd like to take this a stage further. We'd like you to develop an AI system that not only recognizes emotion and acts as if it had emotion, but that it actually has emotion. It doesn't just act as if it were feeling angry, but it really is angry. Well, actually, I think the developers would look at me and say, well, we have no idea how to solve this problem. What we do and how AI works is that we can take inputs of various sorts, we can develop these very sophisticated models for processing and give you output. We know how to do that, at least in principle, but we have no idea how to give it that feeling of anger that you're talking about. That's a conscious experience, and we don't even know how to define it, let alone construct it. So the idea that AI, just by becoming more developed and producing the right kinds of outputs, would develop something like this conscious experience, I think is just not even on the radar. Okay? So I would say that for these kinds of reasons, these limitations of AI, and that's just recognizing the proper limitations, it's recognizing how the technology works, means that there is a fundamental difference between AI and humanity, and things will remain that way. Okay, let's that's really the first bit, thinking about AI and the mind, but I now want to bring in a Christian dimension to this, just to, for a few moments, think about what it means to be human from a Christian perspective. And of course, this is related to the biblical idea that we as human beings are made in the image of God. So in Genesis 1, we read, "Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them." In Genesis 5, verse 1, we read, "When God created mankind, he made them in the likeness of God." And in Genesis 9:6, "Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made mankind." There's a lot of discussion amongst theologians, and as I've started to explore this topic more, the more I've realized just how many different theological views there are in terms of trying to make sense of the biblical notion of what it means to be made in the image of God. But the implications of this are huge. First of all, humans are unique. This doesn't apply to any other part of God's creation. It's humans who are said to be made in the image of God. Secondly, it's universal. This applies to everybody, everywhere, at all times. It applies to male and female. It applies universally. This grounds our values. Did you see that from Genesis 9 about the value of human life? So where is this coming from? Well, it's coming from the fact that we are made in God's likeness. We are made to be like our Creator. And this gives us incredible meaning and purpose in life. So all of these things, I think, flow from the idea that we are made in the image of God. And when we think about these questions let's take the issue of human rights, for example, that are supposed to apply to everybody, everywhere. They're meant to be universal and provide this value and dignity for human life. But where is this grounded? Well, actually, there's a good grounding from it in a Christian worldview, because when we're made in the image of God, it applies to all of humanity. Looking into this a little bit more and exploring some of the different views, and we talked about some of them in our group, and I won't take time to go into them now, but if anybody's interested in exploring this and exploring the different views, a really interesting book by a theologian called Mark Cortez in this, and trying to draw some of the different strands together in terms of thinking about the biblical teaching. He says that human persons serve as God's representatives by manifesting His presence in creation. The image of God involves God creating and constituting humans as personal beings through whom He can manifest Himself personally in creation. I mean, isn't that an incredible thought, that is part of who we are, to be God's representatives, representing His presence. We bring His presence into the world around us. We are His representatives, not just as being appointed, but as representing Him directly in His creation. One way of putting this distinction is to think of the difference between God and creation. If we look at the left side of the screen here, God in His infinity, different from everything else. Humans are finite, animals, plants, everything else in creation is finite, God is infinite. This big gap between God and everything else, we are different from God. But on the right, God is a personal being. And this time you'll notice the chasm appears in a different place, because humans are on the same side of the chasm in this case. Whereas the other animals and plants and so forth are not personal beings. So this, again, this dignity that is given to who we are, that we are made to be like God in certain respects in terms of being personal beings, but unlike God, of course, in that we're not infinite. So much more that could be said about this, but worth just quoting Ephesians. You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. That is the very purpose of our lives. We're created to be like God. Okay, and we'll see the significance of that shortly in the context of AI. But again, it does seem very clear, doesn't it, that there's this fundamental distinction between humans and the rest of creation, and that includes machines, and it includes AI. I'm well aware of the inadequacy of what I've said already, and in particular what I'm going to say for the rest of the talk, because there are so many issues about the ethics of AI that I couldn't possibly do justice to it. I suppose one of the things to highlight is that in no way am I trying to undermine AI. AI has a lot of benefits. It's a very powerful and valuable tool that can be used in very positive ways. In medical diagnosis, I've already mentioned, elsewhere in healthcare systems, drug discovery, actually using some of these technologies to discover drugs that can be used for curing diseases. It's a very powerful technology because it requires processing vast quantities of information and looking for patterns in the data. And so many people working in that field are turning to these AI technologies. The potential for improving the environment, we'll come back to this point though shortly, but again, when we're looking for solutions, when we're looking for developing better technologies, and this applies in engineering and science more generally, these tools can be very useful in that context, including many areas of science that are being transformed by the use of AI. And in just to take business productivity as well, that would be one of the big application areas about more optimal processes for businesses and improving the efficiency of organizations. So a lot of benefits, there's no question. But also, of course, concerns. So we've got debates about whether robots should be given rights at one end of the spectrum. Should we be thinking about morality in terms of machines? One of the things that came up in the discussion was work. Is it going to take over our jobs? And if so, what should we do as a society? That's going to have big consequences for human society. Autonomous weapons, again, enormous issue. Should we be developing these technologies? The military certainly are. They're exploring the use of these technologies for warfare. Privacy, surveillance, again, huge issues. And sometimes the concern here is that this is what would happen in a totalitarian state, and that is indeed a concern. But there's been a book written called Surveillance Capitalism. And so here it's not the state, it's large corporations and the information they have and how they're using it. And so this is something, again, was coming up in the discussions. We're aware of these concerns. And just to pick on the truth and misinformation as well, again, I think that is a really big concern here. How do we address all of these? Well, I don't have the answers. I was going to say, if I don't have time to give you the answers to these, that's true, but it's misleading, isn't it? Because I don't have the answers either. These are huge questions. But it does seem to me that if we think about humanity as being made in the image of God, that really should be relevant in terms of how we begin to think about these issues. And so I really just want to put that on the table. Let's think about a few of them very quickly. Robot rights. It seems to me we should simply take that off the table. These are machines, are technology, statistical models, and so forth. They are not moral agents. And so the same would apply in terms of moral machines. It is we as humans who are the responsible moral agents. And so I think it's a mistake to be trying to push the technology in the direction of trying to implement the morality into the machine. Turn to the issue of work. Well, at one level it sounds great, doesn't it? We wouldn't have to go to work. AI will do our jobs for us. We can have some universal income or something like that, and we can all just enjoy ourselves. Wonderful. Well, it would be great for a few weeks, wouldn't it? I mean, I think we'd all accept that. But as a way of life, on an ongoing basis, there would be concerns about that, wouldn't there? And isn't work valuable? That's something I think we all recognize. And of course, from a biblical perspective, work is a valuable part of life. It's not the be-all and end-all, it's not the purpose for which we were made, but it's part of it, isn't it? It's part of how we should live. And again, we can go back to the Genesis account and see the importance of work. And similarly, we could pick up on some of these other issues. Let me just take the issue of truth and misinformation and deep fakes and so forth. It does seem to me that one of the concerns as we get these more advanced AI technologies is the place of truth in the modern world. How do we distinguish truth from error? And really, is it just there's just no way of telling. There's just so much information and misinformation and disinformation out there that really truth is a concept that is long past its sell-by date. But it really does seem to me that the truth is really essential, and so that's one of the things that we've got to preserve, we've got to emphasize. And when we think about how we use the technologies, when we think about how social media is being used and how AI is being regulated, if that's the right way to go, and I think some sort of regulation is needed here, it does seem to me that truth should be at the heart of what we're thinking about in the context of all of that. Let me mention one other one, and I suppose it relates to the virtual agents, but here I think there is a concern that as we continue to develop more and more advanced technology, how are we going to relate to that technology? And one of the concerns I would have is that we will relate to it in increasingly human-like ways. And maybe we know theologically, okay, yeah, we're different from machines, but as we engage with more and more advanced technology, are we going to be eroding that difference? And it does seem to me that one of the things that we really should be trying to do is not develop AI in a human-like way. We should be trying to develop it in a way that is as distinct from humans as possible to preserve that sort of difference. And again, I think that's something that, it's not that any of these ideas are something that people without a biblical worldview would necessarily disagree with, but I think a biblical worldview is providing a basis, a foundation for some of these issues with regard to AI that may well resonate with people from other worldviews as well. Okay, so I accept that was very inadequate in terms of dealing with a whole range of ethical issues, but perhaps it gives us a starting point for thinking about them. So let's come on to the last one and think about the future of humanity. I mean, I'm covering a lot in this talk, right? I mean, we've talked about who we are as human beings and AI and the mind, and ethical issues. And now we're only going to deal with one more small one, the future of humanity, okay? So again, obviously I can't do justice to this, but a little bit of the terminology here. So the idea is our current AI is, of course, below human level intelligence, but as it progresses, of course, there's nothing inevitable about this diagram, but some people are speculating that AGI will be achieved, this general level of intelligence at the human level. But then it will, if it gets to that level, it may well surpass that and at some point achieve what's called the singularity, at which case there'll be an intelligence explosion leaving humans in its wake. Okay, so that's some of the technology. Now, this is the speculative end of all of this, so a warning around all of this material. Ray Kurzweil, who was a director of engineering at Google, has for a long time predicted that computers would be as intelligent as humans by 2029, that we'd have technology in the human brain to enhance memory by the 2030s, and of course, if we think of Neuralink, Elon Musk's company, that's what they're working on. They're working at these brain implants. And by 2045, the singularity. Now, for Kurzweil, this is wonderful. We'd be able to improve our intelligence by merging with the AI. It wouldn't be leaving us in its wake. We would be merging with it. And so you get this combination of AI and biotechnology, if you like, to give us an upgrade. Upgrading who we are as human beings. And according to Kurzweil, we're going to exemplify all the things that we value in humans to a greater degree. Max Tegmark, he looks at 3 different levels of life. Basically, the biological level, no change in an organism, essentially, in a fundamental way over its lifetime. Life 2.0, basically human life, cultural life, where we can acquire new skills, we can go and study a course and all that kind of thing. We can develop our knowledge and skills over the course of our lives, but we're still limited. We're still constrained by our biology, our physical makeup, and so Life 3.0 would be removing some of those limitations, freeing ourselves from these biological constraints, technological life. Yuval Noah Harari has written about these kinds of things in his book Homo Deus, and he again considers different options. One would be that we somehow coexist, that we use the technology to upgrade ourselves, again the sort of transhumanist idea. Homo sapiens as we know it has run its historical course and will no longer be relevant in the future, but we should therefore use technology in order to create Homo Deus. We can use this technology to become like gods. Or alternatively, a replacement scenario, and the system itself would now be like God, even though humans would be lost from the perspective. Now, it's interesting in these authors to explore what they think human beings are. Harari says that we're just algorithms. I don't know how you think about yourself. You're just an algorithm, according to Harari. We're merely tools for creating the Internet of all things, which may eventually spread out from planet Earth to pervade the whole galaxy and even the whole universe. Or Tegmark says, our cosmos invented life to help it approach heat death. What about that for a purpose in life? That's why you're here, to help the universe approach its heat death. And you can see how radically different this is from a Christian perspective on who we are as beings made in the image of God. Now, it does seem to me that for some of these authors, and again I would stress this is the speculative end of some of the literature in AI, but it's popular literature, and it is being readily and taken seriously by increasing numbers of people. And it does seem to me that part of what is going on is a bit like a kind of surrogate religion. I mean, these guys are not religious in anything like the traditional sense. They're materialists, actually. But their idea here is to identify the problems with human life, unhappiness, suffering, death, and they look at these problems and they see technology as providing a solution to them. And of course we could agree about the problems to some extent, but the solutions, it's the physical body that's the problem. It's the limitations of these bodies that are the problem, and escaping from them is where the solution is to be found. Harari says that when it comes to death it's just a technical glitch. You know, we'll overcome that with technology. We see technology now as providing our salvation or something similar to it. So I think, well, I don't need to say much to this group about this last slide. A biblical perspective, of course, gives us a very different picture. We aren't just algorithms. We aren't just here to bring about the heat death of the universe. We are valuable creatures. We're unique in all of creation. This applies to all of humanity. It's what gives us value and meaning in life, as we saw earlier. And these physical bodies of ours aren't the problem. Okay, the problem goes much deeper than that, and I think we all know that when we look at the problems we see around us in the world. Technology isn't the solution. In fact, you know, if we go back to the Tower of Babel, and I think this is borne out in history, we don't have time to discuss this, but you see this kind of idea that the idea that we as humans can provide the solution to our fundamental problems, and that we can do it through the use of technology, leads to disaster. Technology is valuable as a tool if we use it in its proper way, but the fundamental problems with humanity require a different kind of solution. But of course, I think Christianity and the gospel has something to say about that. Okay, so what I've tried to do is just look at those three different areas. I've sketched some of them very quickly, but hopefully it maybe gives you a starting point for thinking about different ways in which Christianity, a Christian worldview, relates to some of these issues surrounding AI.